All right, folks, so we're actually at the final assignment of the semester, which asks you to write a proposal. And so what I've created for you today is a little presentation about proposal writing, and I'm going to be fairly general about this because the types of proposals and the nature of the proposals that you write will largely be dictated by the workplace that you inhabit. So some of you will find yourself, for instance, if you work in nonprofit administration or other types of fields like that, you may find yourself writing a lot of grant proposals. If you work in the trades, you may find yourself writing internal proposals to acquire new equipment or tools. So I don't want to be too specific. I am asking you for the purpose of this assignment to write a sort of mini grant or a mock grant proposal, but I realize that for many of you that will not be on the docket and that I need to teach you more generally about proposals. And so that's what my plan is for this short video, and of course we'll learn some other things along the way. So if you've had a chance to take a look at the assignment sheet, which I hope you have, you'll see that essentially you are writing a grant proposal to try to solve some problem on campus related to student experience. And so I'll let you cook up whatever that looks like. I'm going to use a couple of examples that you may want to build off in this particular presentation, but essentially the first thing that we should do when we are writing a proposal is identify a problem. So it could be that some piece of equipment is no longer safe or it is a maintenance nightmare. It could be that the computer system we're using is no longer secure. It could be that young graduates from the state of Maine are fleeing the state after they graduate. In some ways, the strongest foundation you can build for a proposal is to have a really important problem to solve. And that's going to be one of the themes from this presentation, is that proposal writing is about problem solving. And that essentially should dictate the format of your proposal, that you are offering a problem and a solution. And so it's with that in mind that I want to approach this particular presentation. So my goals for this presentation are as follows. I want you to begin utilizing a problem-solving approach to proposal writing. And so that means establishing a problem and offering a compelling and convincing solution to that problem. I also want you to understand the importance of audience to any proposal. And I'll show you, I think through a small example, how important it is to think about your audience or audiences. Because that really changes the way that we characterize the problem and the solution. It kind of changes the unit of measures that we use, or the metrics that we use, or the language that we use when we are identifying a problem and a solution. And I want you to consider the effect of high-quality evidence to support claims. Because at the end of the day, a proposal is a persuasive document. And in the same way that in your sales letter and in your cover letter and in your resume, you had to support your claims with clear, compelling, and user-centered evidence, you're going to have to do the same thing in your proposal. And this is really going to be the first time this semester that you're going to have to go outside and do secondary research, that you're going to have to go out and find information that allows you to paint a portrait of this particular problem and to talk in compelling ways about the feasibility and the strength of your solution. And so I'm going to show you a little trick. I've already posted a few videos to the Blackboard page that show you how to use Google more effectively. And I can tell you that if you watch those videos and you read that infographic, you will never use search engines the same way. You will become more effective at finding high-quality information, and in some ways it will change your life. I know that's a bold claim, but it will, because I use those tools and tricks all the time in my personal life to find information. Whether it's about fishing, whether it's about taxes, it doesn't matter. It allows me to sort of really separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to searching in the big bad World Wide Web. But in this particular lecture, I'm going to show you how to use a great tool called Google Scholar. And so, I could show you how to use the library databases here at KVCC, but the reality of the situation is that as soon as you graduate and you lose your KVCC email account and access to our tools, that no longer becomes a viable option for you. Therefore, it becomes important for me to show you tools that you can use long after you graduate, and Google Scholar is one of those. And in fact, even though I have regular access to the library databases, I almost universally and completely use Google Scholar because I find it to be to have some functionality that, frankly, cannot be replicated through the databases. So I think you'll find that that's very helpful in terms of finding really good empirical information. And when you layer that on top of just using Google's proper more effectively, I think you're going to find that your information literacy, or your ability to find high-quality information, will really be enhanced. So let's get started here. So audience is everything, folks, and you know, that's not I'm not breaking any news there, and that's not a secret. But when it comes to writing a proposal, you really have to think carefully about how your audience sees the world. And frankly, depending on who's reading it, and depending on what their station in life is, depending on what their education is, depending on what their political affiliations are, they're going to see your proposal in different ways. The way I think about it is their lens. What lens do they bring to the world or to this document? And we have to be able to anticipate that, okay? And so the scenario, or the sort of anecdote that I like to provide, is let's just imagine that you work for a construction company and you believe it's time to purchase a newer, larger excavator for the company, that you see real value to that it's time, right? Your proposal, whether it's your problem statement or the way that you lay out your solution, is going to look really different depending on who your readers are. And so if it's the head mechanic, you may characterize it in terms of maintenance costs or maintenance time, or cost of maintenance. So that the head mechanic at your company is really going to bring a very specific lens to that proposal. So the same thing would be true of your chief financial officer, who frankly probably doesn't care about the mechanics of this piece of equipment, but really cares about how it affects the bottom line. How is this going to affect the efficiency of the company? How is this going to affect the reach of the company, or the types of projects the company can take on? How is this really going to affect the bottom line? So rather than characterizing it in terms of very specific mechanical type things, you would characterize the nature of the problem and the solution very financially. The same thing would be true if you were writing to the project foreman, who is likely to see this in terms of the distribution of labor, or again, going back to efficiency. You could imagine that if we were writing a proposal for a new piece of technology, writing it to the head academic officer would be different than writing it to the head security officer. So what I'm getting at, I guess, in essence, is that everybody brings a unique lens to the world, and they see things in a variety of different ways. They kind of have metrics that they see about it. It could be in terms of finances. It could be in terms of safety and well-being. It could be in terms of effectiveness or quality. And so we really want to anticipate that, because every reader really does bring a unique lens. The reality of the situation is that when you are writing a proposal, especially if it's of any scale or magnitude, you're probably going to have multiple readers who have multiple sets of needs. And that's sort of what I've built into this assignment, is that you're not just writing to a group of faculty who care about one thing, you're also writing to a group of administrators at the college who care about another thing. So I think it's a really important thought exercise anytime you're writing a proposal, to sort of sit down and ask yourself, who the hell is going to read this? And what do they care about? What keeps them up at night? What are the things that move the needle for them? What preoccupies? What takes up most of their headspace? And if you do that, I think you're going to be able to really build a document that responds to their needs. So if we think about what an administrator at a college cares about, they probably care about student success, so they want their students to graduate on time. They want their students to be able to transfer or get jobs, so that those things are important, because those are the things that they're held accountable to. They also care about enrollment and revenue, because they got to keep the place afloat. So those are the things that they're kind of bringing with them to the document. So you have to characterize your problem in that way. So the example might be, if you want to write about food insecurity on campus, which is a real problem at community colleges, our students disproportionately are affected by the lack of funds to buy high quality food and to eat on a regular basis. You have to write about that problem in a way that's going to move the needle with an administrator. Sure, anybody with a soul is going to say, oh my God, that's terrible. People need to eat because, it's just a basic human right. And that should move the needle to some degree. But you also have to characterize it in ways that will professionally resonate with them and logically resonate with them. So it's not just about, oh, these folks can't eat. It's that's going to affect things like enrollment. That's going to affect things like time to graduation. That's going to affect things like GPA, retention, the ability to get jobs after after they graduate. So what I'm getting at is you really need to think carefully about your audience because that's going to dictate how you characterize the problem and the solution. Okay, and that's true of any proposal that you write. I don't care what it's for, whether you're trying to propose a new position, you want to hire somebody else, well, you better think really carefully about how your readers are going to anticipate that. The other thing that I want you to think about is that each audience member brings a certain level of resistance. And so what I like to do oftentimes is I like to think about what the devil's advocate would say. So what would the most dubious person at that table say about my proposal? How might they try to poke holes into it? And so then what I'm going to do in my proposal is I'm going to take those head on in the same way that you were probably taught in English 101 to anticipate counter arguments and either discredit them or to diminish their significance. You're going to sort of do the same thing in a proposal. You're going to say, hey, I know what you're going to ask me, and here's my solution to that. So I want you to keep that in mind. Audience is everything. Bottom line, it's everything. As we've talked about, proposals are problem-solving exercises, and so no matter what type of proposal you're writing, you're essentially solving a problem. Now, sometimes that problem is going to be established for you, right? You might have a scenario where you have a crew of technicians that go out and service particular pieces of equipment, and they're taking too long, okay? And you may have to come up with a proposal to solve that problem. You've been given the problem, and it's your job to simply come up with the best solution. In other cases, it's up to you to identify the problem, and that's what I'm sort of putting in your lap with this particular assignment, is that it's up to you to identify the problem on campus that needs to be solved, okay? And so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to write what's called a problem or a needs statement, and that's where you lay out what the problem looks like. And I want you to think of it as a landscape or a portrait of the problem, and it's not just, hey, here's the problem. It's, hey, here's the nature of the problem, here's the scope of the problem, so here's how many people it affects, here are the consequences of the problem, so here's what happens when we don't solve the problem, here's the immediacy, here's why we need to solve this right now. And you know why that's important is because for these types of open-ended proposals or grants, there's a prioritization that happens. So everybody has problems. There's problems everywhere. So it becomes which one is the most important problem to solve at this moment. And so that should be the way that you approach your problem statement. It's not just, hey, I want to prove that there is a problem. It's, I want to prove that this problem needs to be solved before pretty much any other problem gets solved, right? That the consequences of inaction are so dire that it would be foolish not to take action. And so whether you're asked to characterize the problem or not, it's your job also on the other end to prove that you have a really good solution, not just a solution, because there are a million solutions to any problem, but that your solution is optimal, that it's the most cost-effective, it's the most time-effective, it's the most resource-effective, that it has the highest likelihood of succeeding. And so part of what you're going to do in your proposal is you're going to prove that. Okay? And there's a number of ways that you can prove that. You can base it on research. You can base it on a model. So, hey, I know that college resource pantries work because at the University of California, Berkeley, where they had comparable numbers of food insecurity, they did this, this, and this, and it led to increases in student achievement among the poorest students on campus by 12%. Okay, now you're talking my language. Okay, so that's what I want you to think about, is that not only do you have to characterize the problem in compelling ways to prove to us that not only is there a problem, but it's a damn big problem, but that also your solution isn't just a solution, it's the best solution. And that's that's not easy. And that requires you to really think carefully about how you characterize your solution, and it really requires you to do your homework. So that's why the second part of this little lecture is going to be so important, is that you cannot write a good proposal without high quality information. Now, I realize if we go back to my example about the excavator, you're probably not going to have to go to Google Scholar to get that information, that evidence. But what you are going to do is you're going to go back to your books and you're going to look and you're going to say, hey, this smaller excavator, how many hours of labor did it take to complete this job? And you may compare that to, with this bigger excavator, here's how the time savings, for instance. Or you might look at maintenance costs. Or you might look at cost of operation. Whatever it is, you're still going to have to find compelling information. In this case, we're taking sort of a more academic approach, and you're going to probably want to find information that's more academic in nature. But I realize that that's probably not a reality for many of you, but the real sort of truth here is that you've got to have really good information. And then finally, it's really tempting to use, generalizations, your impressions, so what you see, which are important, and anecdotes, which are important, but they cannot be the sole basis of your proposal. You need to leverage credible and verifiable evidence to move the needle with a reader. Now, can you use an anecdote to maybe appeal to somebody's emotions? Absolutely. But that anecdote in and of itself probably does not appeal to logos, and it certainly does not appeal to ethos. Therefore, it does not represent the adequate and the sort of masterful appeal to rhetorical strategy that I'd like to see out of you. So, for example, to go back to my food insecurity on campus example, I can't just say, hey, I see people all the time scrounging for money to buy food out of the vending machines, or people, complain of hunger to me in class. That's, again, it's not without value, but it's as a standalone, it's not going to work. However, if you maybe found some evidence about the scale or scope of food insecurity in Somerset and Kennebec County, or you found out what the average community college student in Maine's income looks like, or you found evidence from secondary sources that supported your claim, now, if we layer those types of evidence together, we might be getting somewhere. And so it's really important for you to try to find information, credible, verifiable, empirical, and also current, right? So problems change over time. And so it's important for you not only to find things that are verifiable and credible, that they come from good sources, that they can be verified or fact-checked, but also that they're up to date, right? That's super important for us. And so what I'm going to teach you in the next half of this lecture is the value of using something like Google Scholar. And this may not work for everybody depending on what your problem is. It may not work for you, and you may be able to find most of your stuff sort of just on the web. And you don't need to have a ton of resources or sources to really do well on this proposal assignment. But you should have a couple of key pieces of evidence that help you characterize not only the problem, but also the solution. And so I would shoot for that, a couple, two really high quality outside sources that help you show or demonstrate the scale, scope, immediacy, consequences of the problem, and then a couple of sources that help you show the practicality and the feasibility and the efficacy of your solution. Those things are really going to be helpful and will really help you create a credible and persuasive proposal. So that's sort of the way that I want you to approach this proposal. In week 8, I'll also share a few more resources, but this should really prime the pump and get you thinking. And then use the outline that I've provided for you in the assignment sheet, and you should be good to go. But the key is, show me the problem, and then explain to me why your solution is the best. And I think that you'll really gain a lot of insight by looking at some of the examples that I've provided, one of which talks about the significant lack of mental health services at KVCC and why that's important. And then the other one talks about something a little bit different. It talks about the consequences of not having a study abroad presence on campus. And both of them are very well researched and very well reasoned, and they do a lot of things really well. Not only do they marshal really good evidence, but they put that evidence in a way that's easy to read and palatable. They use headings and subheadings to break up the content, so it's not just, oh my God, here's the problem, blah, 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 It's really broken up, and it's categorized and compartmentalized in really smart ways. And I think they both talk about problems in ways that would resonate with their audience. To go back to my first slide, it's not just, hey, we've got this problem. It's, we've got this problem, and here's how it affects the things that you care about. Here's how it affects enrollment. Here's how it affects graduation rates. Here's how it affects job placement. Here's how it affects student success. And so that's the way I want you to approach it. If you have any questions about this proposal, or if you have any questions about the assignment, you need to let me know as soon as possible, and I will be happy to help you in any way. Thanks.